Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're doing something really exciting. We are embarking on a journey across an incredibly connected, wealthy, and just totally dynamic ancient continent. We constantly hear about the Silk Road, right? Or the Roman trade networks. But the economic powerhouses of ancient and medieval Africa, they were operating on a scale that is absolutely mind-blowing. We are talking about massive hubs of industry, monumental architecture, and literal global trade networks linking the African interior all the way to the Middle East, Europe, and Asia.
Okay, let's dive right into this by asking a huge question, one that kind of challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world's economy. How exactly did ancient Africa build a global economy? I mean, how did these wildly diverse societies navigate some of the harshest environments on Earth to create wealth that literally destabilized foreign markets? Let's find out. Here is the roadmap for our journey today. First, foundations of African trade. Second, the Trans-Saharan Highway. Third, Mansa Musa's Golden Journey. Fourth, Swahili-Indian Ocean Trade. And finally, Great Zimbabwe's Stone Wealth. Let's get to it.
Part 1. Foundations of African Trade. Mastering the Environment.
As we zoom into West Africa to kick off our story, I want you to keep something in mind. To build a massive trade empire, you first need tools, you need agriculture, and you need a booming population. Basically, you have to master your environment.
And right off the bat, we need to bust an old historical myth. For the longest time, people just assumed advanced metallurgy was brought into West Africa from the outside, a so-called diffusion of knowledge from places like Carthage. Well, actually, scratch that. Archaeological evidence from the Nok culture and central Nigeria completely rewrites that timeline. The Nok were independently smelting iron way back around 900 BCE. At a site called Taruga, they were using these incredibly clever, completely indigenous dome-shaped furnaces. And honestly, these metal tools were a total game changer. They allowed for massive agricultural expansion, which of course led to rapid population growth. This right here was the indigenous technological bedrock that made all those future trade empires possible. Section 2, the Trans-Saharan Highway. The ship of the desert. So the crucial point here is how one specific animal totally revolutionized transit. Before the first millennium AD, if you wanted to cross the Sahara, you were relying on humans and donkeys. It was incredibly dangerous, you couldn't carry much, and you really couldn't go very far. But then, enter the camel, the literal ship of the desert. Camels can withstand extreme temperatures. They can go for days without water, and their carrying capacity is just massive. They literally turned the deadly Sahara from an impassable, terrifying barrier into this bustling, highly profitable commercial highway. And we're not just talking about a couple of merchants making the trek here. We are talking about massive, highly organized caravans moving staggering amounts of wealth. Gold, salt, ivory, the whole shebang. But it wasn't just physical goods, right? These caravan routes were actively transforming the religious and cultural landscape of sub-Saharan Africa. Along with the merchants came scholars, brand new technologies, and, super importantly, the spread of Islam, which profoundly shaped the societies of the region.
Section 3. Mansa Musa's Golden Journey. The Wealth of Mali.
60,000. I want you to just take a second and really visualize that number. That staggering figure represents the size of the entourage the Emperor of Mali, Mansa Musa, took on his famous pilgrimage to Mecca back in the years 1324 to 1325. Imagine a moving, breathing city of 60,000 people just crossing the desert. The sheer economic shockwave this guy caused is just staggering. Listen to this. Mansa Musa was preceded by 500 slaves, and each one was carrying a 6-pound solid gold staff. Plus, he brought 100 camels, and every single one of those was loaded with 300 pounds of gold. When he passed through Cairo, he gave away so much gold as gifts that it literally depressed the value of gold in Egypt for years. He temporarily crashed a major foreign nation's gold market simply because he was too generous. Wild, right? So this journey wasn't just a religious pilgrimage. Honestly, it was quite possibly the most brilliant marketing campaign in medieval history. It permanently altered global trade patterns. Mansa Musa literally put Mali on the European maps of the time. He stimulated this massive demand for Malian gold in North Africa, the Middle East, and even the Italian city-states. But he didn't just export. He brought amazing things back, too. He recruited scholars and architects, turning cities like Timbuktu into these foremost global hubs of Islamic learning, and introduced stunning new Middle Eastern architectural styles to West Africa. Moving right along to Section 4, Swahili-Indian Ocean trade, navigating the monsoon. Now we're shifting our focus over to the Swahili coast of East Africa, where we find this incredibly sophisticated maritime culture. These merchants were absolute experts at capitalizing on the seasonal monsoon winds to connect Africa directly to India, the Middle East, and even as far away as the Indonesian archipelago. You know, the very identity of the Swahili people is a perfect testament to thousands of years of global maritime interaction. While technically a Bantu language, Swahili evolved to reflect the incredibly cosmopolitan nature of the coast. It incorporates these really rich ethnic and cultural admixtures from Arab, Persian, Indian, and Malay traders who traveled there, settled down, and intermarried. It's a true melting pot. Now, a cosmopolitan culture like this requires some seriously organized economics. And as we can see here, Islam provided a highly structured, unified set of rules for the marketplace across this vast Indian Ocean network. For example, you had the Muhtas, who was basically a market inspector enforcing fair weights and measures based on Quranic injunctions. And take a look at this credit system. If you were part of the Ummah, the community of believers, you enjoyed these super favorable custom credit rates between 2.5% and 5%. If you weren't, you paid a strict 10%. Having this shared commercial and religious framework is exactly what built such incredible trust across thousands of miles of open ocean. Historical records like this really highlight just how deeply integrated religion and daily commerce were in Swahili society. These shared practices, well, they weren't just about faith. They dictated the layout of urban spaces, they defined legal communities, and they governed the everyday flow of global commerce, right down to the exact percentage point of a loan. Finally, Section 5, Great Zimbabwe's Stone Wealth, the Southern Hub. Let's head south to trace the arc of the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. So, Proto-Karenga speakers settled the area right around 1000 AD. Fast forward to 1250, and it has emerged as this major trade center. By 1300, it had successfully wrestled economic dominance away from southern neighbors like Mapungwe. At its absolute peak, the capital housed 10,000 people and oversaw a massive state made up of over 150 smaller tributary centers. Once again, we've got to correct a major historical myth here. The builders of Great Zimbabwe used an incredibly advanced dry stone masonry technique. They actually heated local granite so it would fracture evenly, which allowed them to build these towering, massive walls perfectly fitted together, and get this, without a single drop of mortar. The Great Enclosure was this powerful, beautiful display of royal prestige. But when European antiquarians stumbled upon it in the colonial era, they were so blinded by racial prejudice that they falsely denied it could have been built by indigenous Africans. They literally invented wild, baseless theories instead. But today, the archaeological consensus is crystal clear. This was an indigenous triumph, purposefully built by the ancestors of the Shona people. This kingdom was an absolute economic powerhouse. They brilliantly took their local wealth, which came from managing massive seasonal cattle herds and agriculture, and embedded it right into the broader global market. They controlled the vital river routes down to the Indian Ocean, which meant they effectively monopolized the flow of interior gold straight to Swahili coastal cities like Sofala. In exchange, they traded for luxury goods like Persian earthenware and Chinese celadon. It was only later in the 15th century, when resources started to deplete and trade routes shifted north to the Zambezi River, that the kingdom finally began to decline. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you pondering a pretty big question. From the early iron furnaces of the Nok, to the massive camel caravans crossing the Sahara, to the sophisticated credit markets of the Swahili coast, and the towering stone fortresses of Great Zimbabwe, we have seen an ancient Africa that was incredibly innovative, wildly wealthy, and deeply interconnected. So what other vast, highly organized global networks existed in our ancient past, just waiting to be fully recognized? Keep that in mind the next time you think about the ancient world. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.